All right, so today we're going to be doing the Unit 6 test study guide. So I'm going to be completing half the examples with y'all, and then you're going to go back and do the other half on your own. And I will post the answer key on Schoology so that you can go back and check your work. All right, so now let's look at example 1. So for these questions, you're not going to be having to graph. All you're going to have to do is do the key features at the bottom. So to begin, we're going to use the axis of symmetry formula, negative b over 2a. You're going to look at your equation and find that a is 1 and b is negative 2, and we're going to plug those in. So that's going to give me 2 over 2 times 1, and when I type that in my calculator, that gives me a positive 1. So that's going to be my axis of symmetry. So now I'm going to go back and find my vertex. So I'm going to take that 1 and I'm going to plug it into the equation wherever there's an x. So I'm going to have 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 5. And I'm going to type that into my calculator. And when I do, that should give me negative 6. So my vertex will be 1 comma negative 6. So now I'm going to go and put that on the third row of my table so that I can fill out the rest of the table. So I need two numbers that are less than 1, which are 0 and 1, or negative 1, and then I need two numbers that are bigger, so 2 and 3. Now, just like we did before, I'm going to go back and plug in my x values just like we did on that highlighted green equation up there. And that's going to give me my y values. So when I type a negative 1 in, I should get negative 2. And remember, quadratics are symmetric, so whatever I get for the top, I also get for the bottom. So that tells me that 3 is negative 2. Now I'm going to go back and type a 0 in. Which will give me negative 5, and that will also be the answer for 2. So now that we have all that, we can graph this equation. So I'm going to plot my points on this graph. So 1, negative 2, 0, negative 5, 1, negative 6, 2, negative 5, and 3, negative 2. And so that's going to give me my quadratic. So now I need to find the domain, which will always be all real numbers. And then the range, I take y, the y value of my vertex, which is negative 6, and then since it's facing up, I'm going to use the greater than or equal to sign. All right, and that's all for number 1. Let's look at number 2, or number 3. We have y equals 2x squared plus 4x. So I need to find my axis of symmetry, so negative b over 2a, which is going to be negative 4 over 2 times 2. And when I type that in my calculator, that's going to give me a negative 1. So my axis of symmetry is x equals negative 1. And then I'm going to go and type it into the equation again and replace all the x's with a negative 1. Then I'm going to type that into my calculator, which is going to come back, and it's going to give me a negative 2. So my vertex is negative 1, negative 2. So I'm going to put that in the third row of my table, and I'm going to find two numbers that are less than negative 1, which are going to be negative 2 and negative 3. And then two numbers that are bigger, which are 0 and 1. So now, just like we did before, I'm going to take my x values and I'm going to plug them into my equation, just like we just did up there with negative 1. So when I go and plug a negative 3 in, or That's going to give me a positive 6. And then I'll also get that for 1 at the bottom. And then I'm going to go in and plug a negative 2 in, which is going to give me 0. So now that I have my points, let's go ahead and graph them on the graph. So negative 3, 6, negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 2, 0, 0, and 1, 6. So there's my quadratic. So now I'm going to find the domain, which will be all real numbers. And then I'm going to find the range, which is just y, the y value of my vertex, which is negative 2, and then greater than or equal to because it's facing up. All right, number 5. We have y equals parentheses x plus 3 squared minus 8. So this is vertex form, so we're going to be using this equation that I'm writing on the screen. Okay, our axis of symmetry is whatever number sits in for h. And then our vertex is h comma k. So that's a formula that you will need to remember for the test, so make sure to write that on your study guide somewhere. So now, to find the axis of symmetry, I need to figure out what sits in for h, which is that positive 3. And remember, we always change the sign, so that's going to be x equals negative 3 for my axis of symmetry. And then for vertex, it's going to be negative 3 comma whatever's sitting in for k, which is negative 8. So negative 3, negative 8. So I'm going to put that on my table. I'm going to find two numbers less than negative 3. So negative 4, negative 5. And then two numbers that are bigger. So negative 2, negative 1. Now, just like before, I'm going to plug those in just like we were doing. So, for example, I'd have negative 4 plus 3 squared minus 8, and I would type that into my calculator, which is going to give me a negative 7, and I'll get the same thing for negative 2. Then I'm going to go back and plug a negative 5 in, and when I do that, that's going to give me a negative 4, and I'll also get that for negative 1. So now we're going to plot these points on our graph. So I'm going to have negative 5, negative 4, negative 4, negative 7, negative 3, negative 8, negative 2, negative 7, and negative 1, negative 4. So this will be our quadratic. So now the domain is always all real numbers. And the range is y, the y value of my vertex, and then it's greater than or equal to because our graph is facing up. So that completes all our examples on graphing. So now we're going to move to the next part. So for the next part, we're going to be talking about transformations of a graph. So this formula that I'm writing is going to be posted on the board, but it's good just to have it written down just in case you can't see it or you need it. So K represents if it's going up or down. H represents if it's going left or right. And then A, if it's negative, it's going to be flipped. If it's bigger than 1, it's going to be a stretch. And if it's in between 0 and 1, like a half or 3/4, that's going to be a compression. So let's look at number 9. So 2 is sitting in for A, and 2 is bigger than 1. So that tells us that our graph is going to have a stretch of 2. All right, negative 5 is sitting in for H, and since it's negative, that tells us it's going to go to the right, so that would be right 5. And then 4 is sitting in for K, and since it's positive, that means it's going to go up, so it would be up 4. So now let's look at our next section. So on this section, your graphs for 10, 11, and 12 should already be there, but if they're not, go ahead and pause the video and draw those on there. But we're talking about roots, which is just where the graph touches the x-axis. So on number 10, this is my x-axis right here. And these 2 points are touching the x-axis. So for my answer, I'm going to have x equals with a squiggly line, and I just want to list those x values. So this point is at -3, that point's at -5. So then my answer, I would just have -5, -3. Okay, all you're doing is listing where the graph is touching the x-axis. What x values is that? All right, the next section, we're talking about the discriminant. So the formula is d equals b squared minus 4ac. Okay, if d is bigger, this is telling us how many solutions there are. So if d is bigger than 0, that means there's 2 solutions. If it's equal to 0, that means there's 1 solution. And if it's less than 0, that means that there's no solution. And that should just be a d, not a d squared. So now I'm going to fill in my information for this problem. So my a value is -1, my b value is 7, and my c value is -15. So now let's plug those in. So 7 squared minus 4 times -1 times -15. So I'm going to type all of that into my calculator, and it's going to give me -11. So since -11 is less than 0, that tells us that we're going to have no solutions for this problem. So be sure to write these formulas on your study guide so that you'll have them on the test. All right, so now we're going to look at solving quadratics. So on the test, I do not care what method you use. I want you to find whatever method is comfortable for you and just be really strong at that one method. For the study guide, I'm going to show you a couple of different methods, but it's just really important for you to be comfortable with one method so that when you're given the ACT or any type of standardized test, you feel prepared and know exactly how to work out that problem. So looking at this one, it's not equal to 0, so I need to move the -7x and the 5 to the other side. So when I do that, I get 6x squared minus 7x minus 5 equals 0. So I'm going to be using the factoring method. So since I do that, I need to get rid of that number in front. So I'm going to do 6 times -5, which gives me -30. And then I'm going to bring everything else down. And so that got rid of our number in front. So now I need to figure out what numbers are going to multiply to give me -30. So we have -1 and 30, -30 and 1, -2 and 15, -15 and 2, -3 and 10, -10 and 3, -5 and 6, and -6 and 5. Now that I've listed all of the numbers that multiply to give me 30, I need to figure out which pair is going to add to give me that -7. So I'm going to go through and add up all these pairs to see which ones are going to give me a -7. So that gives me 29, -29, 13, -13, +7, -7, 1, and -1. So -10 and -3 give me the -7 that we need. So those are my factors. So in parentheses, I'm going to have x minus 10 and x plus 3 equals 0. Now before I break it apart and solve for x, I need to go back and divide those numbers by that 6 that was in front. So if you divide these numbers and you get a decimal, go back and simplify the fraction and just keep it in fraction form. So I'm going to have x minus 5/3 and then x plus 1/2 equals 0. Now I'm going to break it apart and solve those for x. So I'm going to add 5/3 to both sides. I'm going to subtract 1/2 from both sides. So I get x equals -1/2 and x equals positive 5 over 3. So that would be my solution for this problem. All right, let's look at the next page. So we have number 18. 2x squared plus 19 equals 1 minus 20x. So first I need to make it equal 0, so I need to move 1 to the other side. It has a like term with 19, so I can subtract those two, which is going to give me 18. And then I need to move that negative 20x to the other side, so I'm going to add 20x to both sides. And it doesn't have a like term, so I'm going to put it in between 2x squared and 18. Now for this one, I'm going to use the quadratic formula, so I need to find my a, b, and c. A is 2, b is 20, c is 18. So I'm going to plug that in. So negative 20 plus or minus the square root of 20 squared minus 4 times 2 times 18 all over 2 times 2. So I'm going to type that into my calculator. And if you don't remember how to do that, there is a video on Schoology and you can watch that. But I get negative 9 and negative 1. All right, we're going to do one more together. (21). So we have negative x squared plus 3x equals x minus 19. So I need to move that x to the other side. It has a like term with 3x, so I can combine those. So I get negative x squared plus 2x equals negative 19. Then I need to move that negative 19 to the other side, so I'm going to add 19. It does not have a like term, so I'm just going to put it at the end. Again, I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So a is negative 1, b is 2, c is 19. And I'm going to plug that in. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times 19 all over 2 times 2. Or no, 2 times negative 1. So then I'm going to type that into my calculator. And this is not one that gives you a pretty answer. It's going to be a pretty funny looking answer. It's going to give you negative 2 square root 5 plus 1, and then I'm going to go back and type it in with a minus sign. So I'm going to copy it, press enter, and then scroll all the way over to change it to a minus sign. And it's going to give me (2 square root 5 plus 1. So those would be my two solutions. Now that ends the review for the Unit 6 test.